I was just sitting in Buddy's office and I played the Bela thing. He said, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Well, it's from a Bela Fleck thing." And he said, "Well, Bela can do it because he knows how to do it right. You need to learn the other one first." You know, that's the whole thing. You know, you learn all of the chords and scales and modes, and, you know, you get smart alecky in class and you say, "Well, Mozart didn't do that." And the teacher says, "Yeah, but Mozart knew why he didn't do it." You know, he learned all those rules and then he broke them.
Greetings and welcome in, everybody. It's your favorite time of the approximately every 2 weeks that we can get together and discuss banjos with another episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Yeah, I'm doing my best. I tell myself it's every 2 weeks, but sometimes that gets fudged, and you know, I'm just doing my best to get by, just like we all are, right? We're going to get back with an excellent interview episode here today, but thanks for everyone for tuning in to the last episode, Davy Jones teaching about chord melodies. One of you even recorded one, which was a chord melody theme song from that television show, The Office, which totally blew my daughter's mind. She's a huge fan of The Office, and she has to listen to her dad carry on about banjos and talk about his podcast all the time. So it was a really, you know, her worlds were colliding in a perhaps confusing way, but that was really cool, and I'm glad that people are making use out of that. It was great. But like I said, we're getting back to a great guest interview. But before that, it's a heavy news day here at Picky Fingers HQ. And so I'll go through some of this stuff here. Where do I want to start? Okay, first thing, my favorite part of the episodes, of course, is always when we get to thank our beautiful, lovely, talented Patreon supporters. And there are two sponsors of today's episode. The first is Joshua Adkison. Joshua brews beer and he plays the banjo, which is like two of my favorite B words right there. Actually, he only started playing banjo this year. He says it's his 9th instrument. And Joshua, congrats on finally getting it right. After 9 tries, you finally found the coolest instrument of them all. Glad you're on Team Banjo. It's really good to have you as a fellow banjo player and obviously as a Patreon supporter. So thank you very much for your support. Oh, and I almost forgot, Joshua is single-handedly responsible on if any of you are on Facebook, Joshua recommended that I start a group to discuss this podcast, maybe other banjo-related stuff. Basically, just start a group for us all to chat about stuff. And I did that. So if any of you are on Facebook, look up, and I'm typing it in on my phone as we speak so I can get the name right. There's a group called Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast Listeners, Fans, and Friends. Join that group and we can discuss episodes or future episodes or critiques or your own banjo things. Just another Facebook community for us to gather in between these 2 weeks with an asterisk that we get to hang out on the podcast itself. So Joshua, thanks for the Patreon support. Thanks for the good idea. Hats off to you, man. The other Patreon supporter of today's podcast is Sean Downing. Sean is an old metal kid, and somehow he found the banjo, I guess. He plays in a band out of Lansdale, Pennsylvania. They're called Three Beards and a Bush. I'm not going to conjecture anything about how they got that name. But anyway, they play, it sounds like a very interesting mix of, bluegrass, but mixed with some unusual tune selection. And I haven't checked them out yet, but I'm looking forward to it. Apparently they play some things that you wouldn't necessarily expect to hear. So I'm always down for new explorations for the banjo. Love it. Thanks, Sean, for supporting the podcast. You know, as weird as it sounds, I think there's actually a lot more similarities between heavy metal music and bluegrass than people might think offhand. And anybody who's played both of them, I have not played heavy metal, but I'm recognizing that there is a certain intensity to both styles of music that I think overlaps more than people maybe give it credit for. So maybe that's not so surprising to hear that Sean is into both of those things. Anyway, Sean and Joshua, thank you both so much for your Patreon support of the podcast. Anybody looking to check that out for yourselves, go to patreon.com/banjopodcast and you'll learn about the rewards. One of the coolest new rewards that is offered is there's this fella named Eli Gilbert. And what he's doing is for every guest on the episode, he is making a custom lesson based on their banjo stylings. And he'll be providing a link to a video and also a tab sheet for a custom lesson based on the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast episode with that guest. And if you go to patreon.com/banjopodcast, you can figure out how to get on that list to receive that bonus content. It's super cool. Eli is very good at what he does. And actually, I'll go ahead and recommend that, if any of you are already on Patreon supporting this or maybe some other things, he is doing some really amazing things with banjo and also jazz guitar. Or at least check out his YouTube channel and give him a subscribe on there. That helps him as well, even if you're not able to financially support the Patreon site. So for those of you who have signed up on Patreon, definitely keep your eye out over the next very short period of time. I'll be sending you the link to Eli's tab sheet and his custom lesson for this episode. Okay, next order of business. What do I need to talk about? I want to talk about my good friend, Aaron Jonah Lewis, who you, of course, will know if you listened to episode number 22. And if you haven't listened to that, go back and check it out. Aaron talks all about his classic banjo style. And something really cool that happened after that episode is I think I must have impressed Aaron with my podcast microphones and everything like that. Because after that, he was like, I'm thinking about recording a banjo album, and you have some recording gear. Why don't you record it for me? So I was really flattered. I'm not really a professional recording engineer, but I do have microphones and I do have recording stuff. So I ended up recording a banjo album for Aaron, and it's amazing. It just came out. It's called Mozart of the Banjo, the Joe Morley Project. And basically it's just Aaron shredding some classic banjo along with mostly piano accompaniment, but some other instruments as well. So give it a little bit of a listen to see what I'm talking about. Yeah, this is good stuff. Keep listening for a minute. So check that out. If you dig that track that I was just playing, there's like tons of more of that on the album, and that's being distributed through the record label Old Time Tiki Parlor. Just like it sounds, except it's the British spelling of parlor, the Parlour. So check that out on that website. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. So yeah, check it out. I think it's really cool. Pretty amazing how something that used to be popular even before Scruggs style banjo now sounds so novel and fresh, So good job, Aaron. And yeah, everyone check that out. All right, next thing. I told you it was a heavy news day. You'll just have to deal with it for another few minutes. This interview with Derek Vaden was recorded at the Milan Bluegrass Festival up here in Michigan. And I guess a brief note about Milan. We all have a chuckle about it up here. The two most popular traditional bluegrass music festivals in Michigan is Milan and Charlotte. And it's kind of a joke because Milan is spelled like Milan would be, like in Italy, except we call it Milan. And the Charlotte Bluegrass Festival is spelled exactly like you would expect Charlotte to be spelled. But we call it Charlotte, and people will correct you if you don't say it right. So it's kind of a bluegrass joke up here that all the bluegrass festivals happen in cities where the names are pronounced funny. But anyway, I digress. This was recorded at the Milan Bluegrass Festival, and I have to give another special thanks for this episode to a gentleman named Jerry Eicher. And Jerry is a guy who some of you might recognize. He's a radio DJ, and he hosts a show called the Old Hippie Bluegrass Show. And if you go to oldhippiebluegrassshow.com, that's old just as in O-L, hippiebluegrassshow.com, you'll see a picture right there of Jerry looking absolutely amazing, and find out how you can listen to his program. If you enjoy bluegrass music, it's going to be right up your alley. But anyway, the reason I need to thank Jerry is because I was down at the Milan Bluegrass Festival and getting ready to interview Derek Vaden. And, you know, I was trying to scope out some good interview places, trying to get it away from too much of the main stage noise. Wasn't having too much luck. I was about ready to just set up at a picnic table right around the festival campground. And Jerry really came through. He offered up his RV and his luxurious accommodations for me to just be comfortable and sit with the guest and get a really good interview. So, Jerry, that was very generous of you, my friend. I really appreciate it. And thank you so much for the hospitality and for helping me out. The podcast is definitely better because of it. Okay, finally, I can start talking about today's guest is Derek Vaden. And I think it seems like it was sort of a destiny thing that I was meant to interview Derek Vaden. I was perusing around Instagram as you do, and I stumbled across a hashtag called Tuner Tune Thursday by this dude who I didn't really know who he was, but he was playing a whole bunch of different tunes on D-tuners, and I was really fascinated by it, and I watched a whole bunch of them. And then Gina Furtado, who you know from the episode, the great banjo player Gina Furtado, she's been super cool about sending me recommendations of other players that she knows that she thinks would be good podcast interviews. And it was probably that same day I got a text from her that says, "Hey, you should interview Derek Vaden." And I was like, you got to be kidding me. I was just, watching his stuff today. So I just discovered him on my own the same day he was recommended to me. And then I check his tour dates, and he was coming to the Milan Festival a few weeks after that. So it just seemed to make way too much sense. So I got a hold of him, and fortunately it worked out. And we hopped in Jerry Eicher's RV, and the rest is history. So enjoy here. This is, I didn't even mention, he was playing with the Larry Stephenson band. And Larry Stephenson, of course, is the very well-known bluegrass artist, very much in the mold of like a Bobby Osborne. And Derek's playing banjo with him, so I was really happy to catch their set, hear Derek play, and sit down and chat with him. So here it is, my conversation with Derek Vaden of the Larry Stephenson Band.
I'm actually from Kansas. I live in North Carolina now. Play with the Larry Stephenson Band.
Yeah, and I just saw you guys did a great job, and it's for a good reason such a legendary act. But how did you discover the banjo over in Kansas?
Well, my family played bluegrass. Lots of guitar players, one bass player, one mandolin player, and a lot of guitar players. And there's actually a very lively bluegrass scene in Kansas and Missouri, and Oklahoma and Arkansas, and down into Texas as well. And so we grew up going to festivals in Missouri and Arkansas, and there was one in Park City, Kansas, which is just north of Wichita. And I'm actually, I guess I should say this, I'm from Arkansas City, Kansas, which is 10 miles south of Winfield, which everyone knows about. But we didn't go there, oddly enough, just because it was a big ticket price, and we were in Winfield all the time anyway, and we thought, why do we want to go to this festival? And we really just need to go to Walmart or...
Needed something a little more exotic to attract you to.
Exactly.
Nice.
But we'd travel a little farther and go to, like I said, Harrison, Arkansas was one, and there used to be a festival in Pierce City, Missouri called the Dry Valley Bluegrass Festival, and the Park City, Kansas Festival, and there's a festival in Wichita every year. And, we didn't have the saturation that the East Coast has, but... 4 or 5 good festivals a year, and Lonesome River Band would be there, and Rhonda Vincent would be there, and Larry Stephenson, and all those people growing up. And then there are a lot of really good regional bands, Frank Ray and Cedar Hill, and Bill Mounts and the Outlaws, and Bill Grant was still doing stuff, and lots of people like that. And I actually didn't play when I was little. I started playing violin when I got to middle school.
Just like through the school orchestra program?
Mm-hmm.
All right.
And when I sort of realized that, hey, everybody, because you start playing violin and everybody wants you to play the fiddle, they want you to play fiddle tunes and stuff. I was rubbish at that. I could never get the bow hand to do what the bow hand needed to do to play the fiddle. I could play the classical stuff all right, but so I got a mandolin shortly after that. I played that for a little while. And a little after that, I got a guitar. And it was maybe my 8th grade year. I'd been playing music for a couple of years at this point. And we were somewhere, and my uncle had a banjo in the closet. And I just started fooling with it one day. And my grandma got really mad because we had a family band. She's going to hate me telling this story. We had a family band, or they had a family band. I was too little at the time, and they had a guy playing banjo from a little around where we lived, and she did not care particularly for him or the way he played the banjo.
Okay.
And
we're not naming names, I assume, at least for that.
Well, he's dead, so it wouldn't matter. But
okay.
The family might still be alive, so I'm not going to say anything.
Yeah.
But she just didn't really care for the way he played the banjo and developed this perception of banjo players. And people think this is a joke when I say this, but she came to me and she said, I don't want you to play the banjo. So that's exactly what I did.
Oh, it was your rebellious phase.
That was my banjo origin story. I was just told not to play the banjo, so I did.
I've heard that a lot of people ask Earl Scruggs how he got all his boys to be so interested in music, and what he always says is, I told them they weren't allowed to touch any of my instruments. So teens have a strange way of, forcing you into some reverse psychology, I guess. But
yeah. And of course now she comes.
Were you hired right away to replace this person who wasn't really cutting it?
At that point in time, they hadn't had the family band for quite a while. It was originally my mom's 3 brothers. There's 4 of them, her and 3 brothers, and all 3 of the brothers played. And it was them. One played the bass, one guitar, one mandolin. My grandpa played guitar, and then the banjo player. Mm-hmm. And maybe, I don't know, 96 or 97, that just sort of all fizzled out.
Yeah.
And I started playing banjo in 2002, and it was maybe the year after. It was maybe 2 years after that.
And I'm losing track a little bit. How old are you at that point?
12.
Okay.
Yeah, I started when I was 12, and it was maybe 2 or 3 years after that because I had to, get stuff down.
Right.
the family band started coming back together. But by that point, my cousin was playing bass, who was the son of the bass player, uncle. So it was him and me would play a lot. We were closer in age. We'd play a lot on the weekends and do stuff and get together and learn things.
Were you learning on you said it was your uncle that had a banjo in the closet?
It was that banjo for the first year and a half, maybe.
Was he a player?
He had done, he was the guitar player in the band, and he had done a record up in Lawrence, Kansas in about 94 or 95, and he's primarily a guitar and a mandolin player, and don't care if I do. He was primarily a guitar and mandolin player, and he got a bass and a banjo and picked out 10 songs and cut the guitar and the mandolin parts, and then learned the bass and the banjo parts for the 10 songs.
That was like his project that he wanted to accomplish.
And he knew just enough of a 3-finger roll to make it through those 10 songs that he did.
Okay, well that's actually kind of what I was getting at, was did you have somebody around to show you stuff? I figured that since he was the one who had the banjo, maybe he was able to help you, but maybe not.
No. Oddly enough, he lived, it was right around the time they opened up Kansas Speedway out in Kansas City. It was
a Speedway is in like a car race track?
Yeah, it was a NASCAR sanctioned track, and my family were big into that, and they got season tickets, and it was the very first weekend was actually I guess I've been playing a year longer than I thought I was. I guess it was 2001, because that was the first year they had the races up there, and it was we went up there because he didn't live but about half an hour from the track, and the family camped out in his yard, and of course music was played and food cooked and all that fun stuff. And I remember that being the time that I got the banjo, but I don't remember getting shown anything. I think I sort of had this thing in my head of how I thought it was played. Distinction there, not how I thought it should be played, but how I thought it worked.
Right.
As a 12-year-old, and I remember I started like. It was just like a 2-finger, two-finger thing, and because you can sort of emulate that
square roll,
Of course, not with the pull-offs and stuff, but that's sort of what I was, because I was playing guitar at that point, so I had like once you figure out that's essentially the same chord shape.
Oh, yeah, the 3 middle strings are translate, yeah.
I was sort of just picking it up at that point and trying to figure that out. And
did you have favorite players that you were listening to?
I didn't know anything about it at that point.
Okay.
I didn't have, the bands that I were exposed to up to that point were the local bands that we would see in person. And then I think my mom really liked that first Rarely Heard record, Midnight Loneliness.
All right.
Came out in like 91 or 92. And then I remember Grandpa had, it didn't come out while Flat and Scruggs were together. It was a compilation from the mid-'70s or something, and it had a bunch of train songs on it, like Orange Blossom Special and Atlantic Coastal Line and Brave Number 1262 and Starlight on the Rails, and like a compilation of their train songs for some reason. My grandpa had that tape, and then, used to be at Bluegrass festivals, you could record anything you wanted, and they'd take a cassette recorder and just set it by their chair and record the stuff. So we had like all those Midwest bands that I talked about, and then there was like a couple of Lewis family sets.
Bootleg tapes.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool.
But I didn't know who any of those people were at the time.
Yeah.
And when I started playing, I started digging through their record collection, because they still had a pretty extensive record collection at that point. And I found the Will the Circle Being Broken album.
The first
one. They had the whole complete set. It was 3 sleeves and 6 sides and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And I started playing that and working all the way through. And, that's how I learned who Earl Scruggs actually was, and, Doc Watson and Merle Travis.
All those other guys
Mother
that were
Maybelle and Jimmy Martin. the classic Jimmy Martin phrase that everybody knows is, "Well, pick the banjo solid, John. You picked one for 15 years, ain't you?" And that's really how my bluegrass knowledge started.
Were you able to do pretty well picking up you were teaching yourself to play off of those recordings?
So, we were just talking about this coming down here because we'd listened to, when we first started talking, I told you I'd listened to other episodes, and there were a few people that talked about the slowdown technology. That this was a couple of years before that.
Right.
YouTube hadn't even started yet.
Yeah.
So, it was all rewind button. And I didn't know that you could, showing my age slightly, I didn't know that you could slow down a record.
Yeah.
That's, I wasn't taught how to use a record player. I just sort of figured it out, and I didn't know that if you slowed it down.
It sounds like you and I started at almost exactly the same time. You're a few years younger than I am, but yeah, so the technology definitely lines up the same way, where it was just before you're able to do some of that, but it's still a little late to really have access to a lot of records. Sounds like you had access to some, but
oh yeah, and I almost sort of like it better though, because I think this about everything that anybody does. You sort of need to get in there and make mistakes and get messed up, and you almost, not that you need to learn to do it wrong. But if you get in there and luck into doing it right, you don't really learn anything.
I definitely know what you mean. It's a weird kind of creativity.
Yeah.
Is trying to do something but not doing it quite right. Then it becomes what you do.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Which served me well later. I don't know. I think if I just lucked right into it or had somebody show me what was going on. Not to call myself more creative than I actually am, but I don't think I would be as creative. I think I'd just be some sort of weird clone player, which is not interesting at all for anybody.
Yeah, yeah. So what were the next steps? Is it skipping too far to ask what was the situation where you moved to North Carolina? Was that to play banjo?
It's a little far. It's
okay.
There was a lot that happened in between there. To go back to that Wheel the Circle thing really quick, I was still playing that two-finger messed up thing when I found that record.
Even hearing Scruggs and McEwen and those guys.
Yeah, and the first seminal moment in my life was at Byron Berline's festival in Guthrie, Oklahoma in 2003, October 2003. Earl was going to play there. And my grandpa was like, we need to go see this.
Okay.
If you're going to play the banjo, you need to go see this.
Yeah, yeah.
And so we went down there, and it rained all day long. And two things happened that day. I got to see Earl Scruggs, and I met Blake Williams, who will come into the story later.
Yeah, okay.
But so we went down there, and I was, for the first time, just around a lot of banjo players. John Hickman was still playing really good at that point and still playing with Byron. Blake was there. Earl was there, but you didn't see Earl until the show. Jens Kruger was there.
Oh, man.
That was my first exposure to Jens Kruger.
So these are the top pros, where up until that point it sounds like you were mostly exposed to the regional guys, which is fine, but that's another level.
And that's when I really noticed that, hey, I need to figure out what this third finger's doing. And I went back, and all through that winter, I went all the way to side 6 to the Wheel the Circle cut. And Earl kicked it off, and he went... And just, he would, for the longest time, I would get about that far, and I'd take it back, and I'd play through it again, just repeatedly.
Yeah.
And I wasn't locking in. It was very just clumsy. And then, eventually one day it just clicked. And I had the forward roll going, and everything changed after that.
With all three fingers fully
integrated.
Fingers.
I still couldn't do the other rolls. I wasn't really getting the whole hammer-on pull-off thing. But the roll started to be there. And once you figure out the Wheel of Circle be Unbroken thing, you can move on to some other songs that are on that record. You can start to, figure out the the chorus parts to, or the non-tuner parts to Earl's Breakdown and Flint Hill Special, and then maybe eventually move on to My Walking Shoes Don't Fit Me Anymore, and get in there. And that's how all that started. And then
start to hear the possibilities too. Once you're hip to the fact that that's what you need to do, you hear it differently too.
Mm-hmm. And I started from that point. I started just going through all that stuff and being more brave with other banjo players at festivals, and walking up and talking to them and seeing what they're doing. Again, still regional guys and stuff. But the next year, 2004, we saw Blake and Kimberly Williams at Starvey Creek, which is in southern Missouri, because J.D. Crowe was going to be there. So we went over to see J.D. Crowe, and they were there, and we remembered seeing them previously.
At the Guthrie thing?
Yeah. And my grandpa knew the guitar player from years ago. And so I just, in a moment of teenage gumption, I strode up to Blake Williams and started talking and got to know them a little bit. And then the next year we saw them they were at Winfield, so that was the first year I went to Winfield. It was 2005, and they played there. And they got me up on stage to play at Winfield that year. I played Old Joe Clark.
Was that your first time performing?
Not that I was a professional, but in a quote-unquote professional situation. We had the family band for about a year at this point.
Okay.
So I was playing in front of people of, between 10 and 30 people.
So this was a big deal.
This was a big deal, to step out and there's 1,000 people standing in front of you. We saw him again next year. We went to Sally Mountain, Rhonda Vincent's festival up there. I was exposed to, Blake was there, and he and Kenny Ingram did a banjo workshop up there, which was the most amazing thing I've ever seen. Because
is that when Kenny was playing with Rhonda?
With Rhonda, yeah. And he didn't touch the banjo. He just sat there and talked and told stories and talked about how he played the banjo, which I thought was amazing, because at Winfield, if you go to a workshop, it's just 4 guys sitting on stage playing tunes for an hour, And here's Kenny Ingram telling you how he does it.
Do you remember anything that you got from that, or were you
The only thing that I remember was he talked about how there were only, I'm going to muff this up, but he said there were only 5 banjo players when he started. So there was Earl Scruggs and J.D. Crowe and Sonny Osborne and Alan Shelton, and I can't...
Ralph Stanley or something?
Yeah, Ralph. And he said there were just those 5.
Wow. And
because this is, I don't know, 54 or 55 when he started playing, and that's all there was. And if you wanted, that's who you listened to. And he was talking about how it's so different now, and he sort of wished that people had that basis, because you get those really solid foundations.
He wishes they had the basis of having to start by listening to those first generation guys.
I think that's what his ultimate point was.
Okay.
Just, having fewer choices. Because, at that point, Scruggs style is commercially 10 years old, 54 and 55. And it can be argued that if you learn, I've heard Sonny Osborne say it, if you study the Foggy Mountain Banjo record and start at the beginning and play it till the end and learn where every note goes on that record, you can play any style you want to play.
Do you buy into that?
I think it's a darn good start. If it's a really good way for the type of banjo I play, yes. I think I'm very rooted in the Scruggs style, and in college I was sort of forced to learn that note for note and figure some things out, and my understanding of the banjo after that experience, having learned and studied all that stuff, is so much greater, and I feel like I can play a lot more. I'm not a very melodic player. I'm not good with complicated rhythms, playing in 5 and 7 and 11. I don't get that. My brain doesn't work that way. But for playing bluegrass music, and especially traditional bluegrass music, it's really easy to tell the banjo players that have really studied it and those that haven't.
Is it something that you can articulate what that is that tells you if they've done that or not, or is it just something about...
My college, Buddy Griffin, I went to school in West Virginia, and I studied with Buddy Griffin, who's a great Scruggs and Reno player, and mostly known as a fiddle player, but he's a fantastic banjo player. He said, this isn't really going to clear anything up, I don't think, but he said it's really easy to tell the people that know it but don't play it versus the people that don't play it because they don't know it. And... I played some, I'd learned, I don't even remember where the recording came from, but there's some recording of Bela playing ground speed. And at that point in time, I didn't know how to play ground speed correctly. And I played this, the Earl Scruggs B part is, and Bela did something like, but I couldn't play the Earl Scruggs right at that point. And I was just sitting in Buddy's office, and I played the Bela thing. He said, "Where'd you get that?" And I said, "Well, it's from a Bela Fleck thing." And he said, "Well, Bela can do it because he knows how to do it right. You need to learn the other one first." And that's sort of how I've...
You're allowed to break the rules only after you've...
Which, before I went out there, I got my associate's degree in music and music theory, which is... something I haven't kept up with properly, but that's the whole thing. You learn all of the chords and scales and modes, and you get smart alecky in class, and you say, "Well, Mozart didn't do that," and the teacher says, "Yeah, but Mozart knew why he didn't do it. He learned all those rules and then he broke them."
It's about the intention,
exactly,
or the purpose.
I don't know if that answered the question at all, but. It's
there's some sort of abstract difference with it,
And there's an attitude that you get. The whole, when you start talking about musical feeling like this, it all gets super abstract and esoteric, but
what's the saying? Talking about music is like dancing about architecture or something. I don't know who said that, but it makes sense.
I like that. It's very true, but there's an attitude you get if you really study Earl, because you place notes in a certain way. And Sonny and J.D. had that Earl attitude. And if you think about, if you go all the way back to the beginning, you think about like Ralph Stanley. Ralph Stanley started playing Mountain Clawhammer first, and then transitioned into the three-finger style. And his attitude is completely different than that of the Earl Scruggs lineage. And or Don Reno. Modern Don Reno players are actually a good example, because the way that they play and the way they feel the music is totally different than the Flatt and Scruggs descended bands. And there's a lot of speculation that was a conscious branding decision on Don Reno's part in the early 50s when they started recording, because they came from the same area and they learned the same style from the same person.
Oh, really?
The Shelby, Flint Hill area in North Carolina. They learned from Snuffy Jenkins and Matt Crow and those people. And then, there's that whole philosophical debate about what if Don Reno hadn't
gone to the military.
Exactly.
Would Earl Scruggs be not that Don Reno is a black sheep or something like that, but he's second fiddle in most people's eyes too.
And which is sort of a travesty, but
it is, right.
But there's just an attitude that you get from studying the Earl Scruggs lineage, that if a lot of people, and I don't want this to come out wrong, because I love people like Noam Pikelny and Wes Corbett. I know you had Wes on.
Sure.
They are fantastic players, and they make beautiful music. But you can certainly tell that they started with like Bela and that group of players and then circled around,
worked backwards
to Earl, which is not a bad way to go. But I mean, it's just it's a very evident lineage, and I've already forgotten what the original point of this conversation was.
We were talking about it. Did Don Reno intentionally adopt some differences to distinguish himself from Earl? And I guess also did Ralph Stanley also intentionally adopt some differences? I don't know where we were before that. The Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast is brought to you by our sponsor, Deering Banjos, who want you to know that banjo teachers love good times. In a recent survey conducted by Deering, over 200 banjo teachers were asked, how likely is it that you would recommend the good time banjo to your students? An overwhelming 85% responded that they would, with the number one reason being that good times are easy to play. Even Good Time Ambassador and 2019 IBMA Banjo Player of the Year Kristen Scott Benson agrees that you will not find a better banjo than this in the price range of the Deering Good Time. With the Good Time banjos, Deering understands the importance of starting out with a banjo that will help, not hinder, your banjo learning experience, which is why they make sure that each and every Good Time banjo leaves looking great, feeling great, and sounding great. For more information and to see exclusive videos from Good Time ambassadors Kristen Scott Benson and Pete Wernick, head over to deeringbanjos.com/teacherslovegoodtimes. Let's talk about you, though.
Oh, yeah.
That's what we're supposed to be talking about. This is, I mean, I love talking about those guys, too.
Lots of bluegrass banjo opinions here.
But how did you make strides? So you went to school for music. What were you learning? What were you discovering? What did you figure out that you maybe are still using today? Or you would tell other people to do to really improve their learning process?
Well, I was at a festival right after I graduated high school, or right before I graduated high school in 2007. And Blake was there with the Williams and Clark Expedition, that band, and I was up on stage playing with them. And Jesse McReynolds was there, and Buddy Griffin was there playing fiddle with Jesse McReynolds. And Daniel Grindstaff was playing banjo with Jesse at that point. And Blake and them had me up to play a song, and I played one of Blake's tunes. And Buddy came up to me after the show, and he was like, hey, where are you going to college? Because I think Kimberly had announced that I was graduating high school.
Okay.
And he told me all about Glenville State College, and they just started their 4-year degree program in bluegrass performance, which was the first in the world.
Oh, really?
It was. And I'd already committed to a community college in my hometown, which I'm glad I did, because it was a good theory-based education. And I got my associate's degree there, and then I went to Glenville and studied with Buddy for a while. And when I got out there, he really picked apart what I was doing. Mm-hmm. He's has a very thorough Earl Scruggs knowledge, and showed me a lot of things that a lot of people don't get right, and showed me, I'm not to say that I do them right, but it showed me what the right way was versus what I was doing.
What are some of these things that a lot of people don't get right?
A good example
Asking for myself.
A good example is in Little Darling Pal of Mine. There's a weird little...
Okay.
That little weird thing.
Yeah.
And it just... When I was playing Little Darling Pal of Mine at that point, because, the Carnegie Hall record was heavy on my rotation, and I don't remember what I was doing before that lick was introduced to me, but he stopped me right when I got to it. He said, "That's not right," and he showed it to me, and it took a good day to get that it's something I don't think about now, and it just goes in there.
Yeah.
But it took a good day to get that figured out, and then like that started my brain working, and putting the right roll on Reuben. I don't remember what I was doing before that, but it showed me what the Reuben was supposed to be, and
like basically showed you that you needed to be even more careful about how you were listening to it. Was that?
Yeah.
Is that kind of the point?
Yeah, and just because I went back a couple years after I'd left there, and I was teaching some of the students, and there's this one kid that wanted to learn some Sammy Sheeler thing or something like some modern player like that, and I said, well, if you want to learn that, you need to learn this thing that Earl does. And I didn't really realize it up to that point, but if you learn, this is my overarching point, I think, if you learn that stuff and you learn it well, and specifically you're down to the note like Buddy was trying to teach me, you can go out and you can play Sammy Sheeler stuff, because you know how all that stuff works together. Everything Sammy's playing, everything that Kenny Ingram played, everything that Aaron McDarish plays, Kristen Scott Benson, it all starts right there. And if you want to play that modern style of bluegrass, you've got to study all that stuff, and then you get the fingerboard knowledge, you get the roll knowledge, you get the knowledge of when you're supposed to drop your thumb down to the second string, and
And how do people do that?
In my case, I really needed to be shown. I grew up in Kansas, and there just wasn't anybody to show me. And I needed to be corrected. So I had developed up to a point incorrectly.
Yeah.
And then I got into a situation where there was somebody knowledgeable enough to show me everything that I wasn't doing right with regards to Earl.
Okay.
I want to say with regards to Earl, because right is rather subjective, but with regards to Earl. And, once I was shown all that and knew what it was supposed to be, you can go back and you can play along with all these Earl Scruggs recordings correctly. You can get your timing down and your note separation and all that stuff that everybody likes to talk about. And you can really focus on that stuff and get it right. And then you can find yourself in a situation where you're playing more modal or modern or minor or in some weird tuning, and you don't have to worry about your right hand at all, because you've got a really solid banjo foundation.
Yeah.
And
so you said it helped you having someone correct you with regards to Earl. You made sure to qualify it like that. How does that whole thing intersect with what you said earlier about sometimes you need to be forced to make mistakes to push yourself into finding your own style? In which ways did you maybe retain?
That sort of started in while I was at Glenville, because every year they have a bluegrass artist come to play with the college band for their annual concert. And the year that I was there, Ronnie Reno came out. And the bluegrass band for the college did a set of songs, and Ronnie came out and did, I think, 5 songs with us. And he gave us a bunch of Reno and Smiley songs that we were going to do with him. And Buddy, being the sort of teacher that he is, made me learn the Don Reno breaks to these songs. And, the concert goes off well, and we're standing out in the lobby, and Ronnie says, "Hey, I want to tell you something. That was really good, what you did, but if you go out there and play, don't play like my dad. Do your own thing."
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's coming from somebody who probably has more respect for that music than just about anybody.
Exactly.
And he's telling you not to do that.
And fast forward a couple of years, I've moved to Asheville at this point, and I just happened to move in next door to Marty Lewis, who's the son of Ralph Lewis, who played guitar with Bill Monroe in the mid-'70s. And I got in with that bunch playing locally a lot. And I had a band called the Sons of Ralph.
Okay.
It's a bass and guitar, and then Don Lewis played fiddle, and then Ralph would come out and play mandolin sometimes.
Okay.
And we ended up having this weekly gig at a restaurant in Asheville every Wednesday night, 7 to 9. And I did that for about a year, and I was playing out with the first band that I played with, Jerry Butler and the Blue Jays. I was playing out with him still at that time, and I'd come home and have this weekly gig, and I sort of treated that gig as my experiment, because the Sons of Ralph had played together for years at this point, and all the rhythmic foundation, they weren't listening to me play. Like, unless it was like a kickoff, anything past that was just, yay, we've got a banjo player now.
Yeah, he'll make his banjo noise and we'll play our rhythm.
So I used that gig to try out ideas and licks and chords and all this fun stuff.
That's fantastic.
And I fell on my ass most every night, multiple times. Just bad. If I did that today at this festival with Larry, I'd quit.
You'd get fired, right?
I'd probably get fired, but I'd quit before that. And but it was a really good learning experience, because you can sort of figure out this idea will work in this context or this situation, or you might learn a different fingering or a different way to play the same lick in a different position or something like that. So that's sort of how I worked in, being able to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And, a lot of times we're playing in a restaurant, either people aren't listening or they're getting drunk already and not able to listen.
And it's okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's totally okay. And there's no record label or people trying to buy your CDs or festival promoters or anything like that. So you can just do whatever you want. But, that helped me a lot. Because when we were playing pretty regularly, I could go try stuff out there and then just, sort of accidentally work it into shows on the weekends.
Yeah.
Out on the road.
After you've sort of smoothed out the rough parts.
Not even that sometimes. It would just,
really?
It would just sort of fall in because it was better for this context than it was for this context.
Okay.
This idea that you'd have. And it was it's just a really good way to try stuff out. And not everybody has that situational experience, so that's maybe not the best way to recommend for people to do that. But
get yourself a weekly gig that's low pressure and with people who are willing to let you be experimental.
Yeah.
Moving along quickly, the way I started noticing your playing is you have a lot of videos of you, mostly of you using detuners. How did that become a fascination, or what's with that?
Well, there was a guy in the Midwest named Harold Goad, and he passed away last year. But he was part of this gospel band, a very Chuckwagon Gang style, and he played banjo and guitar and mandolin. And when I was maybe 14 or 15, I have cheetah keys on my banjo. They're the detuners that I use.
Okay.
They'd just come out, and he had somehow gotten hooked up with the guy that made them to sell them.
Okay.
And Harold used to be an Amway salesman, and he could sell shoes to a guy that didn't have any feet. He was great at it. And I bought a pair when I was 14 or 15 years old, and they've been on whatever my main banjo is ever since. So I learned, if you study Scruggs, you've got to learn Randy Lynn Rag and Flint Hill Special and all that stuff. And that had occurred, and I played all that stuff throughout the years, And then at some point, I'd started just sort of around the house, just like...
With palm muting like that?
Yeah, just like trying to be steel guitar-y. And there's not much you can do because you're only alternating between two notes. But it was sort of fun. And then Nick Dauphiné, who plays in the Larry Stephenson band with me. We moved to Asheville about the same time and got to know each other. And he asked me to play on a record that he did with his brother called Empty Teardrops. And that title track, I was trying to figure out. They did it in F, so I decided I was going to tune the banjo down to F. And I was trying to figure out how to play the melody, because I don't know. I feel really strongly about, if you have two breaks in a song, two banjo breaks in a song, really try to play the melody of the first one and just really state it solid.
I actually really noticed that about your playing. I listened to it a bit, and that's really apparent.
If there's a second break, do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. Just get after it. But I was trying to figure out how to play the melody on this song, and the only way that I figured out how to do it was with the tuners. Something close to that. I don't remember exactly.
And it would be a step down, of course.
Yeah. And that was, that record got a little attention with a few people, and got some radio play. And John Weisberger in Nashville has always been very helpful to me in my career. And he said, you really ought to, if you ever make a banjo record, you should write some tuner tunes. Like, nobody does tuner tunes anymore.
Right.
And I started I never could write any, but I thought I'd learn a bunch. And Jeremy Stevens put me in touch with this old Buddy Rose record, and it had some tuner tunes on it. And Walter Hensley has a great record, which I think it's called New Bluegrass or something. And it's actually been rebranded as something else, but the original record is called something like New Bluegrass. And there are a ton of tuner tunes on there. Plays like East Virginia Blues out of D-tuning, and Down in the Willow Garden, and he has a couple of original tunes.
That would be a good
on
one. I can picture that one. Yeah.
And it's in D-tuning, so if you tune that one up, you got a B minor chord.
Yeah. Yep.
So he played on that for Down the Willow Garden and East Virginia Blues, but I started doing that, and then all those, Instagram got really big, and you had all those Flashback Friday and Throwback Thursday and Sunday
Mondays
Fun Day and all that fun stuff. And John has since moved to Asheville, North Carolina. He's taken up a position. I was
going to mention that. I think he's over by you now.
Mm-hmm. He took up a position at Crossroads Records, and that when all that was coming about, he would visit regularly. Uh-huh. And then he was with Chris Jones at the time, and they were coming over to record, and we'd always go to lunch and talk and stuff. And one day I just made a joke, and I said, I ought to start Tuner Tune Thursdays.
Oh, no.
And then, I just sort of said it, and we went on about a conversation. And about a month later, I remember that I'd said that, and I forget what the first one I did was, but I was sitting around the house one day, didn't have anything to do, and I recorded whatever the first one was, and just put hashtag Tuner Tune Thursdays on there. And John shared it on Facebook, which I no longer have, but I had at the time. And, the next week I did another one, and I get this notification from Ned Luberecki, and Ned had picked it up and wrote a tuner tune and taken the hashtag with it.
Oh.
And then, there was sort of like this brief blip of, I've got something here. And then, nothing sort of happened again for a couple months.
Okay.
But this last festival season, 2018, we'd go out places and people would be like, man, I love those videos. I'm like, how are you seeing these videos?
That's how I found you.
And like, you know, Kyle Tuttle and Daxon Lewis and all these banjo players are coming up to me like, man, that's awesome. I'm like,
Have you gotten any, other than Ned, has anybody else jumped on and tried to participate?
There have been no other artistic submissions, but if you have a tuner tune out there and you would like to do it, just record the tune and do hashtag Tuner Tune Thursday.
And you check it and try to...
I check it from time to time and see what's... It's mostly just me in that one Ned video, but...
I didn't even realize that it had spread that far. I thought it was just your thing that you make these tuner videos. I'm glad I know that now. That'll be a good challenge.
Yeah, it's really fun. There's a guy at home, Don Lewis actually, who I mentioned before. He's got a banjo that's got it's got cam tuners on it and 4 Keith tuners.
Wow!
And I'm gonna go over there one day and just figure out this weird combination of things that
you
I'll
can
be
make
able to
3 different adjustments between the 2 different styles. Yeah.
Exactly.
Now you're really talking pedal steel territory.
Yeah, I've not been that brave yet though.
It's getting complicated. But I do want to go through the rest of your gear and what you're using. But I wanted to remind you, it sounded really intriguing. You mentioned earlier that there was a Midwest. What were you saying? There's a Midwest technique of playing banjo?
Let me tune this thing real quick. There's a thing, when we first started talking, you said, it'd be great if I could figure out things that were unique about my playing to talk about. And I racked my brain, and the only thing that I could think of was this. There's a banjo player out in Arkansas named Robbie Boone. And everybody listening, if you're not familiar with Robbie Boone, look up Robbie Boone. Mm-hmm. There are a number of banjo players that would not be playing the way they do if it weren't for Robbie Boone. I'm one of them. Aaron McDarris is one of them. John Meyer, Janice Martin, we wouldn't be who we are if it weren't for Robbie Boone. And we all do this thing, and you can hear it in Aaron's playing. I heard that Mashville Brigade record that they did a few years ago. Brandon Rickman and Daryl Webb and Aaron and a couple other people. And Aaron did this thing that I've never heard anybody that's not from that little pocket do it. So I think we've sort of traced it back. Robbie, there's a guy named Kenny Cantrell who used to have a band in Arkansas and played with Frank Ray for a number of years that really influenced Robbie. And the rest of us as well, because he's still playing and was playing when we were all learning.
Is he related to Kyle?
He's not.
Okay.
That I'm aware of. But I got to think about what the non-example of this would be. Normally, there's a banjo thing where you do a pull-off, and all of us go.
Okay.
So in context, it would be like, but we would go.
And the difference is that you're picking it
rather than
pulling
going
it off.
You'd go.
Okay.
And
there's not that middle third or the.
You're essentially adding a pick stroke. And it's such a small, minute thing. It's not something you would ever think about.
Yeah.
But I've never heard any other... I've never heard an East Coast player do it. I've never heard a West Coast player. Only that little pocket of... And you go back and listen to like I said, the Mashville Brigade record or any of the stuff that Aaron cut with Larry.
Okay.
And the stuff he's doing with Rhonda now, you'll hear him do it.
Okay.
And it's really...
And you do that too?
Yeah. And it's not something I ever thought about. Because Kenny had this, I suspected it was from Kenny, because he had this tune called Flowers Creek. And I'd learned that at some point, and when I was learning, and it's got that... rather than going...
Yeah.
And I was trying to figure out where that came from because somebody had pointed it out to me at one point, and then I started hearing Aaron do it, and I was like, "Where did we get this?" Because Earl never did that. Had
he identified that, or
I don't know if he has. I haven't talked to him about it.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask him next time I see him though.
Yeah, that's funny.
But yeah, Robbie does it, and I'm trying to figure out where it came from, and that's about the only thing I can.
That's so cool. It's so rare to find those things anymore because there's just so much information about what everyone's doing. It's hard to get those little pockets of a musical dialect.
Yeah.
What's this instrument that you have?
This is my main Rode banjo with dead strings. It's a 2011 Hatfield Buck Creek. I've had it since Spigma of 2012. It's all exactly the way it came to me, except I put a Huber head on it, and I made bridges for a while, and one of my bridges is on here.
Oh, very cool.
And
you're no longer doing that, I take it?
I just don't have the space or the equipment in Asheville to do it. I was working at a shop. I wasn't working at a shop in Kansas City. A guy in Kansas City let me use his shop and his tools to build these, and I cranked out about 40 or 50, and because when I was a teenager, which is when I started building the bridges, I couldn't afford a Snuffy Smith or a
whatever the fancy ones were.
Yeah, I couldn't do it. So I had my grandpa had tools and I had plenty of wood, so I just made them, and the first ones
turned out pretty well.
Were very rough.
Okay,
I bet. The first 20 or 30 were not good, but the 20 or 30 after that were okay, and that's still primarily what I use. Blake Williams has one on his Chief, and I gave a couple out to some other people to try, but they ended up not really working for them.
Well, that's cool.
But
what do you prefer about the Huber head? That's what I use too, actually, but I'm interested of what made you try that.
I don't know what the scientific reasoning is, but I like whatever the thicker frosting provides. I like it.
Mm-hmm. Sound-wise, you mean?
Yeah.
Okay.
This banjo came with just a standard Remo head, as did all my banjos that I have, but they just... I don't even know really how to describe what I didn't like about that head on a banjo, but I had, and maybe this is all psychological, I don't know, but I had read somewhere that the older heads used to be frosted a little thicker, and that's why Steve had tried to have them make them this way, so they're a little thicker. Right. And I tried one and I liked it, and that's all I've been using ever since.
Yeah, cool. And what's your banjo made of? Is that a mahogany?
Yeah, the Buck Creek is his mahogany banjo.
Okay.
It's his lowest tier mahogany banjo. There's no frills. There's no inlay in the resonator or purfling or whatever that's called, and it's just Arthur Hatfield's whole thing is making a professional quality banjo at an affordable price. And I think this model's $2,800 right now.
Okay, but you still it's still pro quality. It's just you said, it's not none of the gold plated, engraved, inlaid.
Most of the people that are playing his banjos are playing a Buck Creek model with a few exceptions. So it's a good quality banjo, and it's actually funny because there are things about this banjo that are not my preference.
Such as?
It's mahogany, for one. I do like a maple banjo. And the neck is a lot thinner. My other banjo, I've got a 2003 Granada that I purchased from Blake Williams, and it's got a really nice, fat Granada maple neck, and I really, really like that. And this one's thinner than that. So if
you prefer the maple and you prefer the chunkier neck, why is it that you're taking this one out? You're just being protective of the other one?
Well, I've got an endorsement deal with Arthur, so I'm playing it partly because of that, but I've become so used to how it feels and how it sounds, and what I can and can't do with it.
Okay.
That it's almost more versatile because I know it so intimately.
Huh.
And
Interesting.
I was trying to describe this to somebody earlier out here at the festival that I'm playing the Granada on stage today. I brought this because it had the tuners on it, and I knew we'd talk about that. But I was playing the Granada out there earlier, and I can't play that banjo in all situations. It doesn't sound good with new guitars.
Interesting.
There's a lot of people around Asheville that have newer Collings and new Martins, and that banjo it doesn't.
And what
sound
do you
good
consider
with them.
new? Just for the
Made in the last 10 years or so.
Okay.
It's something about the overtones with those two, because the Granada's gotten really dry, and if you put it with I don't know what, musically speaking, you'd call the opposite of dry. Wet seems wrong, but
like a rich,
yeah, really just sort of full of overtones
complex,
and new sounding. It just doesn't sound right, and this banjo is much more versatile in those situations. Our guitar player has an older Martin guitar, and I feel comfortable playing both banjos with that guitar, but most of the time the Granada doesn't work well with new instruments. And this one's got a lot of sustain and just it's very versatile and can handle those things better, it seems. So I tend to play it more in local shows and out on the road, and this one will work better with a poor quality sound system too. The Gibson's very unforgiving if the sound is bad.
Gotcha. So what else is anything else in your setup that you're partial to, at least in terms of microphones or tuners or your cheetah keys or anything like that to talk about?
I'm really hooked on these the J60 Plus Deodario strings.
What's the thing with those?
They're light. They're very light, but they still have a nice resistance. They're not. I don't have to work for it, but at the same time, they're not loose and floppy. And which is
kind of a best of both worlds
sort of
thing.
Ironic, because I think it's 9.5, 11, and 12, 20, which is a very light set.
Yeah,
but
yeah, sure is.
I don't know if it's the cores they're using or the way they're run through everything, but they just have a lot more resistance than even like the regular light set that they sell, which is
a 10.
I think so.
Okay, I
don't know if it's the 9.5 thing, but and I guess when I'm thinking about that, I'm thinking mostly about the first string, because there's a lot of. I mean, you get up the neck, especially. There's a lot of first string stuff and backup and.
Okay. We want a nice solid sound rather than like a twangy, or stringy sound,
or just something that's going to hurt your fingers, like an 11 or something would. I can't do anything if the strings are that heavy, because if you start at an 11 and you just go up, it's rough.
Yeah.
Earl used mediums for all that stuff on his banjo. The entire time that he lived, he used mediums, and I never could understand. Sonny does the same thing. Jens Kruger does the same thing. I guess I just don't have the strength to finger strength to push those strings. I don't know.
Yeah, got to work your way up, I guess, maybe, or whatever you're used to, and if it's working, then don't mess with it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Anything else to say? Any other like parting words of wisdom for people learning and digging your playing?
Sort of maybe in conflict with all that stuff about learning Earl Scruggs real solid. The other thing that I would say is just play everything. Because growing up in Kansas, there were like 2 bluegrass bands. And if you wanted to play music, you had to play anything you could get a hold of. Mm-hmm. If there was a singer-songwriter playing at a coffee shop one night, play with them, or play in a rock band, or play in a blues band. I played in a blues band in college.
With your banjo?
And, it was this guy in my hometown had this. He was in like a hardcore like B.B. King style blues band, and he wanted to do this little like acoustic side project. It was all blues music, and he wanted a banjo for some reason. And I was like, all right, fine. And, not to say that I was good at playing any of that stuff, but having that broader perspective of music.
You feel like it helped you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Excellent. Tell everyone where they can find your stuff online or track you down if they want to come see a show or buy a CD or something.
The fastest way to do it is go to the LarryStevensonBand.com. The tour schedule is on there. All of the product is on there, including the one CD that I'm on, which is entitled 30.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm on that record by the Dauphiné Brothers, which is spelled awful funny. The title of the record is...
I wouldn't have guessed that it was pronounced that way.
Yeah. The title of the record is called Empty Teardrops, and those are the two easiest places to find me. Otherwise, type that hashtag into social media. And
what is it? Tuner Tune Thursday?
Tuner Tune Thursday.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely going to try to keep tabs on that one.
Yeah, the problem is thinking of... I got ahead of myself because now I got to keep thinking of stuff to play with the tuners. So
well, hopefully, what I hope for your sake is that maybe other people will take it and run with it, and you'll get credit for starting it, but it won't just be on you.
Oh.
But there's enough of us banjoists out there. We can all contribute.
Take the pressure off a poor Midwest fella.
Yeah, exactly. All right, man. Well, thanks again for giving us all your time. Pleasure to chat with you.
It's been fun. I don't get to talk about the banjo very often, oddly enough.
I'm here for you anytime. All right, man. Cheers.
Yeah, see ya.
And that's going to do it for this episode of the Picky Fingers Banjo Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me to listen to Derek Vaden of the Larry Stephenson Band. Thank you very much to today's Patreon supporters. That's Sean Downing and Joshua Adkisson. Thank you to Jerry Eicher of the Old Hippie Bluegrass Show for providing the RV studio for today's interview. Once again, go to patreon.com/banjopodcast to become a supporter yourself. Contact the show at pickyfingersbanjopodcast@gmail.com and check out the show notes for all the links to Jerry Eicher's show, to Aaron Jonah Lewis's classic banjo album, and all that sorts of fun stuff. Don't forget to subscribe to Patreon if you want to get Eli Gilbert's custom lesson based on the playing of Derek Vaden and many others as the episodes roll on. But that's going to do it for today. I hope to see you all next time for another great episode. Hope you're all having a great 2020 so far, and looking forward to spending the year with you. There are a lot of banjo topics to still explore, a lot of great guests to still talk to. Stay tuned. Over and out. I'll see you next time.
Whew. Oh, golly, I'm a rambler.